Well, good morning and Merry, not quite Christmas. Hey, glad for joining us this morning. We're actually heading towards the end of a message series called Christmas, kind of the backstory. And we've been just looking at how messy that very first Christmas really was. In fact, today we're going to look at the messiest of all of the Christmas story. And I think for some of us, messes are a big thing. We don't like messes. When we see a mess, we want to fix it. We want to clean it up. And there's other of us in this room that messes are like, not a big deal. I know where things are at. So I'm going to do a little poll this morning. How many of you are messes just drive you crazy, folks? All right. How many of you are messes aren't that big a deal? I know where stuff's at, folks. All right. Yeah, you know. But there's something that sort of resonates with us, and it's that's a thing. Not just because you're a Christian, you have messes are good or bad kind of thing. But that's just a people thing. But there's something that draws us together in all these messes and things, and more than just the messes of stuff, just the messes of life. And it's this. It's in your bulletin there in the outline. If you may want to follow along, or you can follow along up here. That we have an unquenchable desire to find meaning and purpose in even the most random events in life. You notice that? We ask questions, we wonder about things. We have sayings, right? Everything happens for, right? And I think that's true. Everything does happen for a reason, but sometimes we use that as there's this mystical, spiritual reason, and that's, this happened, and so that's the way we deal with it. Just because you got in a wreck this week didn't mean that, you'd forgotten to pray this morning. Maybe it just means you're a lousy driver. I don't know, but, everything does happen for a reason. Sometimes we say things like, it just wasn't meant, right? That's the way we deal with, try to make sense out of these random events. Some of you this Christmas, you're going to be asked, or you're going to have this told to you. You just haven't found the right job yet, one yet. It all kind of comes out. But we have this unquenchable desire to kind of find meaning and purpose on all this random stuff, and it goes on even farther. That when tragedy strikes, we ask why. Right? Why did this happen? Well, what else is going on here? Or we want suffering to connect to some reason. We want to find purpose in pain. And the story that we're going to look at today, even in the midst of the story, the author that writes about this and records this story will give us a picture of that, of trying to find rationale or reason or meaning. And as I was reading the story this week, getting ready for today, I was reminded that 5 years ago, this past week, was this terrible shooting up in Sandy Hook Elementary School up in Massachusetts. Remember that? 20 children killed in their school, 6 adults, and just literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people hurt by that event. 20 children. And in fact, historians will tell us the event we're going to look at today, that what happened there probably involved about 20 kids because of the size of the place. But we're going to look at this messy story for a couple of reasons. One is that sometimes looking at how messy the first Christmas was reminds us that even in the midst of messes that we find ourselves in, job messes, school messes, legal messes, relationship messes, all those kinds of things that maybe those words that we just have sung together, that God is with us, that maybe that'll be enough for us. And maybe that's really the key for it being enough for us. So before we jump into the story today, I'd like you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, in this room we sit as a group of people, and online we're watching as a group of people who know at times how messy our lives are, and how messy stuff happens in that. And for some of us right now, this is a good time because we are not in a mess at this moment. But we know that a mess is not very far away normally. Something will pop up, something will happen. Some of us in this room and some of us watching online are in the very midst of the worst mess of our lives. And wherever we find ourselves today, there's one thing we all share in common. And that is we all want to have a sense of your presence. We all want to know that we're not alone in either the unmessy time or especially the messy time. And so I just ask, Father, that you would take this old true story that was written down for a reason, to remind us of not just what happened, but even to, in our own minds, we wonder how this all works together. And I just pray today that whatever the message is you have for each of us will come through to us. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in Matthew chapter 2 today. And this is a story that, Jason talked about wise men. It involves these wise men, these people that come from the east. We don't know how far the east is. They've traveled some kind of distance following the star. It sounds kind of crazy if you're not a person of faith. They see the star, they decide there's something significant about this, supernatural about it, from some readings they have, some writings they have, and they follow this star. Could be a handful of miles, could be hundreds of miles, probably more like hundreds of miles I don't know how long, it doesn't tell us how long, till they finally get to Jerusalem. And they've come to Jerusalem, and they know what they're looking for. They begin to ask as they enter the town, where is this baby that's been born King of the Jews? We've been following a star, that's why we're here. And this causes a commotion in the town. Word gets out. People begin to wonder, what's going on? These strange people from this other land show up. They're asking these questions about some baby being born that's King of the Jews. And at that moment, everybody in that population also knows that they have a current King of the Jews who isn't really Jewish, but he's gotten there through this whole Roman process, as Roman has taken over this country and has picked who's going to be there. This guy named Herod ends up being the king of the Jews, not because he's Jewish, but because he had won this battle and he appealed to some people, had some connections, and he got the job. And everybody who knows anything about Herod, they know that he's an ambitious guy. He's a very smart, strategic guy. He becomes this great builder, this great planner, but he is also known for two things. He is hated by everybody because here he is, king of the Jews, and he's not even Jewish. And second piece is, he's a pretty ruthless ruler. He's the guy that's got his position, and he will do anything and everything to keep that position. So when word gets out that this delegation from some country from the east has come looking for this brand new baby who's been born king of the Jews, everybody gets a little worried, because if Herod gets ticked off and excited, he may decide something bad's happened, some revolution's taking place. He may not only kill these wise people from some other place, he may start just killing people. And so the setting is they've come, they've asked some questions. Herod has called in the religious leaders and said, hey, what's going on? Tell me about this new baby, Where is this Messiah going to be born? And they all say, in Bethlehem. And then as we pick up the story, Herod has sent out word to these wise guys, and here's what it says. That Herod had a secret meeting that has privately summoned the wise men. He wanted this quiet place where he could meet with the Magi, this private meeting, and inquired from them the exact time they first saw the star. And for Herod, he's thinking, not only do I want to know who this is, I want to know the timing of stuff, because he's got to come up with a strategic plan to squash this potential threat to his throne. And so he talks to them, and Matthew doesn't tell us much. Matthew wasn't there, so he doesn't know the whole story of what they talked about, but apparently he inquires about the time they first saw it. And then he sends the wise men, the Magi, to Bethlehem, and he says to these guys before they leave, look carefully, that is, go and search for the child. Guys, I want you to go, and I want you to, search everywhere. Bethlehem's not a huge place, but look every place. And here's what I want you to do. When you find him, come and tell. That is, report to me so that I can go and worship, that I can pay homage to him too. And apparently it sounded very sincere that this is what he was about, that he wanted to pay homage. That's not really what he wanted to do. But in that moment, that was the smart thing, the strategic thing to do. Now, for some of you, you're familiar with this story, and some of you are very familiar with the whole Christmas story. And I don't know if you ever have sat down and thought about who in the Christmas story you sort of connect with. Who do you sort of feel like, I'm a lot like this. I really feel a connection with them. I don't know if is Mary your person? For me, Mary isn't. I've never been a teenage girl. I've never been a teenage girl who's pregnant either. So that, she's kind of out. Joseph, I don't know much about him, and there isn't much to connect there. I think about, the shepherds, the wise men. There's one I'd like to be, but, if I'm honest, not probably there. You have angels, clearly not an angel. Baby Jesus, clearly not baby Jesus either, right? If But I don't know about you, but I've often thought that the person that I connect closest with, and maybe you do too, is this. Now, for you, those who know the story are kind of getting upset at me at this moment, right? Because you're thinking, hold on, Mike. This guy is a bad guy. But I just want you to think about not just what he represented, but who he was as a person. There's some three things that sort of stand out about him. That he would do everything to preserve, anything to protect, anything to control. His ambition drove him. And I want you to just think about your own life. Isn't that kind of part of your story? That you do whatever you have to do to preserve your job, preserve your family, preserve your reputation, to protect them. And let's be honest this morning. We all like to be in control. Right? Even when we're acting like we're not in control, we want to really be in control. And I just want you to think about that idea that maybe there's a little bit of Herod in us. And sure, there may be a little bit of Mary with her sweetness and her devotion. Maybe there'll be a little piece of Joseph with his commitment to doing the right thing and even being willing to change the plan of what the right thing was when he hears from God. Maybe there's a little part of the shepherds, of people when something comes across their idea that they're willing to go and follow that and find it out. Maybe we're like the wise men that maybe don't understand all the details, but are willing to go to great lengths to get answers. But isn't it possible that there's a little Herod in each of us? Now, thankfully, I don't think we got a big part of him in us, because he was a bad guy. Like I said, he'd come to power, and if you remember, movies or maybe high school history, we had Mark Antony, we had Octavius, who becomes Caesar. We have Cleopatra. This is all about this time period when Herod shows up. And Herod ends up backing the wrong guy. He's a buddy with Mark Antony. He's a buddy with Octavius. But he's good friends with both of them. But then they begin the battle, and he has to decide who he's going to support. He goes with Mark Antony, picks the wrong guy, by the way, because Mark Antony ends up losing out. And so then he has to go do something for Octavius. And everybody has known that he has backed Mark Antony through this whole thing. And he does this amazing thing, this incredible thing, one of the most unexpected moments in order to secure his spot. Because when it gets discovered that Octavius, who becomes Caesar Augustus, when he takes over power, he begins to kill all the people that were backing the other guy. And so your choice as a ruler, and he was king of the Jews at that time, he was ruler in Judea there, was either to run away or to kind of hunker down or just to cut the story short and kill yourself. But what he does is not any of those three. He actually gets on a boat, goes to the island where Caesar Augustus is at, goes in and requests a meeting with Caesar, who everybody's like, are you crazy? You're going to get killed. And he goes in and he basically says to him this: Caesar, you know how I backed Mark Antony at the start. We've been friends. I backed him through his battles with you. I even backed him to the bitter end. And the thing you need to know about me, that proves how loyal I am when I give my word to somebody. And so at this moment, I'm giving my word to you. That I will follow you. That I will support you. Do anything. To which Caesar apparently goes, this guy's a smart guy, And I could really use this kind of guy. And actually takes him and actually expands Herod's kingdom. But to give you a little insight about how worrisome Herod was, how threatened he was by everything. I mean, this is back in the days that you got rid of all your stuff. We're told something. I'm just going to read a list. I had to write these down because there are just too many things. Early on, Herod has a 17-year-old brother-in-law who he decides to make the high priest in the Jewish faith, because he's afraid that if he doesn't make him high priest, that the Roman government actually might make him king of the Jews. And so he doesn't want that. But about a year later, the brother-in-law has become too popular. And so Herod sets him up at a party so that he will have a drowning accident. So brother-in-law's out of the way now. Everything's good. A couple years later, He's one of his wives. He actually had 10 wives and a ton of sons. And actually 4 times throughout his life, he changed his will because he'd say, this son here is going to be the next ruler. And that son would do something that he didn't like. He'd kill that son. He'd go to another son. You're the son. Now you're going to be it. 4 times he does that. At some point, the kid's got to be going, that's okay, Dad. I have no interest in being king. Take care of it. But one of his wives, he decides that she's having an affair. And so he has her tried. And his sister is the prime witness against his wife. And his wife's mother also testifies against her daughter. Now, the reason she testifies against the daughter was that she was on his hit list as well. So she thought by doing this, she'd save herself. The problem was she did that. Then she went out and told everybody, this is clear that Herod is out of his mind, that he's lost his mind because he had battled depression. He had this kidney disease that he battled his whole life. So he was always sort of agitated and at the edge. And he said, this is clear that you would kill your wife. And so she said, I'm going to be queen now, which strategically Caesar, she got a little ahead of the game, and he took care of that as well. It goes on. Another brother-in-law he had killed. He had a bunch of officers clubbed. Had two of his sons he suspected of plotting against him, which apparently history has shown they weren't plotting against him. But at that moment he thought they were, so he had them strangled. 5 days before his own death. Now he didn't know he was going to, I'm going to die in 5 days, but 5 days before his death, he had another son who actually was trying to take his throne executed. In fact, there was a saying that may or may not be true, but it's been around history for a while. Better to be Herod's pig than his son. And Herod knew as he was getting close to the end of life that nobody would mourn his death. And so he orders his old soldiers to go out and bring in all these respected people from around the country. And their orders were that when he died, they were supposed to die as well. So somebody would be mourning. This would be this great sign of grieving all over the country, and it could be claimed it was for his death. Thankfully, when he died, I think it was a sister and a brother, or a sister and a brother-in-law decided that wasn't going to happen. That didn't happen. But I tell you all that because Herod was a scary guy. And to have attacked him was to put yourself in this huge threat. And so here we have this whole idea that he has met with these wise men. And everybody's agitated because nobody wants this to go bad because they're afraid. And it's 5 miles between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And so he sends the wise guys out. He says, go find them. I'm going to use them. They'll go find, they'll worship, they'll come back, they'll tell me, and then everything will be great. And Matthew will pick up the story. Sometime later, and I can't imagine it was very long because I have to imagine with everything I know about Herod's personality, he was always trying to find out, any news yet? Have you seen the wise men? Or what's the story? Because he was afraid. Any threat was a threat. And so when Herod saw that the wise men, that the Magi had tricked him, that outwitted him, outsmarted him, sounds like a survivor, right? He was furious. And a furious Herod was not a good Herod to have around. And if you're familiar with the story, you know exactly what happens. He gave an order that he sent soldiers to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and in the surrounding area who were 2 years old or younger. The historians will tell us it was probably about 20 children. To which we may be thinking, well, 20 children isn't that much, but I'll remind you again, Sandy Hook, 20 children. In fact, Matthew will tell us there's a reason that he picked boys that were 2 years old and younger. It was in keeping with, that is based on the time he had learned from the wise men, from the Magi. That when he had asked them, hey, what time did you see this star? He figured this out. He would go back that far. And so apparently the whole process was 2 years from when they started to when they were there. And this is oftentimes the part of the Christmas story we leave out. It's not a manger. It's not shepherds out keeping their flocks at night. It's not angels bringing the story of good news of great joy. It's the messy part of Christmas. And some of you have messy Christmases that have happened in the past. And they too are stories that you don't like bringing up, you don't like reminding yourself of because of what happened. And sometimes you try to make sense, why didn't they show up that Christmas? Or why did they show up, especially with him or her? Why did they come now? And we try to make sense of all of this. And Matthew will tell us his way of trying to make sense of this. He says, so what God had said that was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah came true, was fulfilled. And I don't think Matthew's saying here that Jeremiah made this prophecy specifically for this occasion. I think he's doing what we all try to do. And that is in the middle of tragedies. We try to get our questions answered, the why questions answered. For him, coming from a religious background, he says, this is like what Jeremiah talked about. And it was true. That a voice, that it was a cry, this mournful cry was heard in Ramah. And this is the place that the Jews had left to go into the Babylonian captivity. So this was a bad place. This was a reminder place of a lot of bad things coming forward in the years. And he says, Ramah, painful crying, there's weeping and deep sadness, a great mourning. Rachel crying, that is weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because her children are dead. They are no more. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Not exactly a merry Christmas, but it was and is part of the Christmas story. And it's a part we shouldn't forget and just gloss over because it tells us some important things. It tells us that 2,000 years have gone by since this story happened and was later recorded, that humans have always wanted to try to put things together. And this whole everything happens for a reason, or it just wasn't meant to be. Trying to make sense, trying to connect dots, trying to understand what sometimes seems ununderstandable. And the reality is the God that doesn't allow bad things to happen to people doesn't exist. And that's a cold, hard reminder from the very first Christmas. We like to think, some of us, of the God that we're sort of always there, that when we need him, we call on him. When life's going good, we kind of forget him, but he's sort of always there. But when it happens, hey, God, show up, do something now. You're going to save us, protect us. And that doesn't mean that God doesn't at times step forward and do things. But sometimes bad things happen. It happened on that very first Christmas. But I think even in the midst of that, there is a message, and it's a message of good news to us in the middle of this tragedy. And it's simply this: that God doesn't promise to keep the bad away, but to be with us. God does not promise to keep the bad away. But his promise is to be with us. Now, if you're wired like me, sort of a cynical, sarcastic pessimist, you may be thinking, well, what good is being with me if it doesn't fix the bad stuff? The answer is, it can do a lot of good. Because if you've ever had a medical issue going on, something not working right in your body, and you keep going through test after test, wondering if, at some point you get to the place, I just want an answer. Even if it's a bad answer, I want an answer. And at times in a relationship that you know is not going well, but you haven't asked the question, haven't had sit down and had one of those, Let's define the relationship. Let's figure this out. Are we staying or going? Sometimes you just let that go on and on, even though you already know the answer. But it's sometimes just knowing the answer so that the inevitable happens, and it happens clearly, as opposed to just kind of muddling along. You know, it'd be better to know 3 months or even 6 months out that you were going to lose your job than to find out on the Friday before Christmas. There won't be a job on the day after Christmas. See, in the midst of the whole Christmas, of that first Christmas, there was one consistent and clear message. That not only was a baby born, but that God was entering this planet for one reason and one reason only. So that he could be with us. Us in the mess, us in the bad times, us in the struggles, us in the challenges and the things that we face, the temptations, the frustrations. So what if? What if you chose to believe that God really is with you in everything? Because that's really a choice that we all have offered to us. What if you made that choice to really believe that God is with you in everything, even at the moment it doesn't seem like he's with you in anything, because he doesn't seem to be doing anything? Not only does he seem to be distant, he just seems to be absent at this moment. But what if in that moment you said, you know what? The very first Christmas reminds me that he was still there, even in the midst of this horrific response by Herod. And what if the going through is his being with? Thank you, Lydia. Just want you to think about that. What if the greatest gift that God could give us is not just forgiveness of our sins, not just hope for a future, not just an understanding of important details, but what if the greatest gift that God can give to you and to me is the gift of being with us? In this Christmas, I hope that no matter what you face, whether it's an unmessy Christmas, which I hope it is for all of you, a little bit messy Christmas because somebody's flight got delayed or somebody got, all the packages didn't show up in time, or if it's the Christmas from not a good place, and it's just really messy. I hope in any of those, in all those situations, you will choose to remind yourself that he is with you. Because he is. Because that's not only the promise of the first Christmas, that's the assurance of the first Christmas. Merry Christmas.